to each other directly, live, face-to-face, as much as we can, being thousands of miles apart, and doing that with each other, and getting to see each other's faces and talk about this literature with people they would normally not get to speak to. But this is a challenge. We can only get so many people in these common sessions, and Professor Norman Sandridge is going to speak a little bit later, and he has given us many, many students, and he's given his students have taken up the bulk of these courses, which gave us a great baseline. But it's hard to get 50 students in one common session. So that is something we've worked on, and as Ryan said, that we've improved that through the years, but as Ryan said, that is the hardest and the least effective way to get the students involved. We have done better, but it is a challenge. The second platform, we wanted to get the students interacting by writing on different topics, and our success rate on that has increased significantly as well. And so getting them to, we have gotten less and less formal about it, but getting them to react to a piece of literature, to a topic written by either one of our faculty participants, or we got it to be more and more student-directed as time went on, to react to a portion of the reading with sharing their thoughts, and then being able to respond to each other on some sort of platform like a chat board. We started using a WordPress site, and this is when we were doing things a little more formal, expecting a certain number of words for a response, expecting a certain number of responses to that post by a student. And we got, last spring, we started to change our perspective on that. We just want the students to talk. We would like them to focus their ideas, but we want them to talk as in write and respond. And we started using the Slack chat app to do this. And this was very, let me try to share part of this. This Slack chat was very useful. We had different the students divided into different groups, and they could write to each other about different topics. And then we had the full group, the full class met together, and they could chat during the common sessions. And that was very casual and a lot of fun, and we got a lot of interaction, a lot of thoughts shared about this literature in this sort of more informal chat way. And I encourage my fellow participants in these experiments to speak up, but I thought that that we got a lot of good discussions going, and the students really did engage with the material by using these platforms. So those are the two ways that we've tried to engage the students. And the course director, the job is to make sure we're all coordinated to get students to come to be willing to participate in the Google Hangout synchronous session, to remind people to be participating in the asynchronous blog or Slack chat writing. So getting everybody to participate is the challenge of the course director as we've done it so far, and we keep getting better at it, I hope. I think we have. So that is what I have to share about running these courses, and so I'll hand it back to Kenny, but I'll be here for questions.
Thank you, Gwen. Let's segue to Christine Tully, okay, who occupies a really interesting position in our initiative, because she comes from a completely different, well, allied but different world at Findlay University, and teaches rhetoric. And so this is, I'm just going to let her describe what's going on, because it's an amazing thing, all right?
We're crazy. So, okay, you've heard about the Council of Independent Colleges initiative for the seminar in ancient Greece, and that's how I got involved in this initially. So I wrote down in 2014, I can't believe it was that long ago, but I had actually applied to be a participant in that seminar on the Odyssey, and one of our new vice president was somebody who had experience nominating people for that. And he said, I know you teach classical rhetoric, and he slid the flyer under the door, I mean, that kind of thing. And I wound up going, and it really caused me to kind of rethink how I was shaping a graduate program in rhetoric that I was building at the same time. So these things, Sunoikisis, our participation in, and graduate program in direct, they've really kind of grown up together, which is really interesting. So Findlay, the University of Findlay is about 4,500 students, and we're south of Toledo in Ohio. So we're not really a liberal arts college. We don't have a classics major, although we did teach Greek and Latin at one time, as I've had my students do in an archival project. But right now we are the only master's degree in rhetoric at a private institution. And so that we occupy a very unique place in Ohio in terms of master's programs. So we're run through the English department, but we are interdisciplinary in the sense that we take communication faculty teaching sometimes, we'll have philosophy faculty teaching sometimes, anything goes, and that includes our partnership with Sunoikisis. The other thing to know about this program is that when I built it, I knew I wanted a face-to-face program, and at least in the English studies world, this is going kind of against the opposite trend of what's happening with master's programs in English. So a lot of them are going online to get high school teachers college credit writing credentials, so they can teach college writing in the high schools, which might be somewhat outside of the discussion here, but I knew I didn't want that kind of program that just was the credential factory. And the other thing that I knew that we could do with being at a private institution that wasn't too large is that we would attract students from English, classics, communication, philosophy, and I was missing the other one, law, pre-law. I knew we could attract those students from those small liberal arts colleges in Ohio. There are so many of them, and we're big, but we're not too big. So it's just the right kind of culture to be able to do something like this. And so how we ended up doing this then, when I was at that Odyssey seminar that summer, I knew I was going to teach a class about rhetoric in the Odyssey in our graduate program, just because I could, because I was making it and I was putting the courses in it. I knew I wanted to teach classical rhetoric as part of that program, so I knew that we would have some investment in classics and look at interdisciplinary relationships there. And as part of that, they were talking about the Sunoikisis course and how they were going to do it, and I said, well, I can make a course, we can totally do that. And so, boom, we had one. We had graduate students taking the class just like the undergraduate students did it the first time around with some modifications. So the way that I ran it was a 3-hour seminar, and then the 1-hour common session, we would be in a seminar room, but we would participate with it, projected on screen. Students could be chatting. Sometimes they were in the Google Hangouts, also being helpers, discussion helpers, or taking roles like that. But then the other 2 hours were traditional graduate seminars. So it was a weird mix of how we had that going. And then the students in that class really enjoyed that so much that it kind of shaped how in our rhetoric program we have reconceived within our program how we're talking about the start of rhetoric. So within rhetoric and writing studies, rhetoric and composition, which is the side that I'm from, pretty much all the anthologies start with Plato. Maybe you'll hear Corax and Tisias, but that's it. You don't think of anything happening before that. But there's a scholar, his name is Richard Enos, and he is someone that talks about how rhetoric in that little vein of English studies is completely missing out on previous conversations about that. And so as a result of this seminar that we did with the Odyssey, now we start in our rhetoric program starting with Homer. And we talk about how Homer had a rhetorical system that was evident, even though it's not in our anthology, it's not the way that we think about it. And it's also helped our rhetoric students really think about, like, within English, what's the relationship between rhetoric and literature, for example? Because prior to this, we were just conceiving Homer as the text by Homer being something that literature students dealt with, or classics, or anthropology, or somebody else, not us. You know, we just do Plato moving forward and how it affects composition and writing. So from that experience, and what happened was the students enjoyed it so much, and they really, they got very invested in this part of our program. And so they helped me actively recruit all around Ohio at all those private liberal arts colleges. I see them all. I'm on the road all the time in the fall. And we go to these little teeny programs where they have classics and philosophy, and we talk about our experiences and why our rhetoric program is different, and how we have the online stuff happening with Sunoikisis, but we also have a very face-to-face, deeply discussion-oriented, very heavily invested in writing. We say that's our #1 goal, that when the students leave, they're going to be 10 times better at writing. We really push on the writing. But this has really enabled us to do that because we kind of think through big rhetorical questions. So a couple other things about that. Our next 2 experiences, our graduate students actually got to participate more as first discussion leaders and then kind of group leaders in these small groups that Gwen was talking about a couple minutes ago. And so both Ryan and Gwen have helped us really develop how that's going to work to give these graduate students some more responsibility, because they certainly enjoyed participating in chats and things as the undergraduate students did, but you know, they were the ones that always wrote the longest responses, you know, and you could clearly tell like who was a graduate student in those small groups and who wasn't. And so one of the things that they were asking for, and that, you know, Gwen and I had talked about, Kenny and I have talked about it, but just giving them a little bit more responsibility. And so this last time for the Herodotus course, we actually brought 2 of my graduate students with me to the Center for Hellenic Studies, and they were involved in the planning of the course. So they got to decide, like, what kind of writing rubric are we going to use? How is the chat going to function? How are the small groups going to function? And I would have taken more of them. I would have said, I had just 2 this time. It just turned out that was a big rhetoric conference weekend, and so they were all presenting somewhere else. But in terms of a financial investment, the University of Findlay has been very generous, but it has not costed us that much to be a part of this, even with all the extras and the frills. So I wanted to make sure I said something about money, because we're all concerned about money. But I figured it out. I only spend about $3,000 a year for this. And yes, that is a lot of money, especially in like a small liberal arts college. But what I find is that the way that our budgets work is I have about $8,000 for the whole program. So it's, you know, it's a significant chunk, but it's not all of it. And so what that money is used for is that it's money that I can take students if we want to go to Washington, D.C., if we want to bring in somebody like Norman came and visited us. He came to Findlay. He actually got to see us and actually work with the students face to face. We're bringing Ryan in the spring. And so I have some money to bring faculty in and kind of work with the students on campus face to face, but still have this online experience, still have those other things. And you know, some of that money comes from the university for that $3,000. Other ways I'm getting it, and quite frankly, I'm a little bit mercenary about it, but we have a lot of older donors who are concerned that the classics aren't being taught, so they're my friend. They donate money all the time, and they're very interested in what we're doing. And so I'm sure I show slides all the time. I'm actually giving a talk in November to donors. They're just very, you know, they're very interested in this. And I thought they might be anti the technology aspect of it, but they love it. They really think this is cool because they think that the University of Findlay, in a lot of ways, we're more of a comprehensive university. We have liberal arts programs, but they want to maintain that liberal arts heritage, and they feel like our master's program is one of the places where that's happening. So just a couple quick things to kind of conclude there. Let's see. I didn't want to forget to say this. Okay. So one other thing that we already had happening is that within our rhetoric program, we have a partnership with the Toledo Museum of Art, which I had already arranged before I even got involved with this, because I was very interested in having students work with material artifacts and material culture while we're learning about rhetoric. I really want it to be multimodal in the full sense of the word, not just textual. And so Sunoikisis has really lent itself well to this. So, for example, they just had an exhibit at the Toledo Museum of Art on the Berlin painter, and I took a bunch of our students up there. They had participated in Sunoikisis, and oh my goodness, it was just such a rich experience. They do private classes for us there, and so that is like a third way that we're kind of just expanding the conversation about what rhetoric can do, why we care about like classical issues, you know, that sort of thing. And then also, I just wanted to leave you with 2 quotes from the students themselves. I had actually offered to take students to New York City because I had a little bit of money left, and I said, if anybody wants to come with me, you can. But once again, this is a Feminisms and Rhetoric conference in Dayton. It's huge. It only comes around like every other year. All our students are presenting there. So I'm like, anybody want to go to NYC? And they're all going to Dayton, which is really kind of funny. But, you know, and they didn't seem sad either. I'm like, come on, you know. But let me give you the two quotes from them to kind of finish up. So these are from 2 different students who have participated. One has participated in all 3 of the courses we've had because they've stayed 3 years with us. They're going slower through the program. And then the other one has done 2 of them. So these are experienced Sunoikisis users. So the first one is for one of our students, Eileen, who also got to help plan courses. I know some of you guys know Eileen. So she says, participating in the Sunoikisis courses the past 2 years has increased my understanding of our field of rhetoric and writing tremendously. I compare this experience to any course requirement where discussion of theory is coupled with practice or observation of theory in practice, as when a science lecture is coupled with a lab requirement. While we've read texts by Aristotle and Cicero as graduate students of rhetoric and discussed how their theories apply to many forms of rhetoric, most of our observations of those applications happen through the same author's examples in the text, like Gorgias and his examples of rhetoric in the encomium of Helen. So that's Eileen. So we've talked more about this, that she really likes to see things live and in just a richer context than just like getting the big anthology. We read a big anthology called The Rhetorical Tradition, and you know, she's interested in moving beyond that text, and we've actually moved beyond it quite a bit, like to the point where I'm not even really assigning it anymore, which is like just crazy in like master's program in rhetoric, but it's optional. So, all right, and then the second one is from another one of our students. This one they were allowed to do it with their names or anonymous, and this one was anonymous, so I'm not sure, but they said how long they had been in the program. So, however, this partnership with the Harvard Center for Hellenic Studies has acted as a deeper engagement with theory, particularly as classics faculty from CHS offer examples in the weekly common sessions. We noticed rhetorical devices like ethos, kairos, agency, and rhetoric happening in other texts that were being produced around the same time as our field was developing, such as the Rhesus. As a result, we can then use those examples and apply them to current rhetoric. For example, I've been interested in the discussion of ancient leadership and how observing how leadership is figured and described rhetorically in Herodotus' histories, and that's helped me to navigate some of the modern forms of U.S. leadership in another seminar paper. Furthermore, studying Euripides' plays last year ended up contributing to my discussion of performance and how it differs from performativity in my MA thesis. So, just to close up, I think they are getting a lot out of this, and I think there's a way that even though this is more of an undergraduate experience, as far as I know, we're the only graduate students partnering with Sunoikisis, it does seem that we can think about it maybe a little bit beyond just a traditional undergraduate classics English type experience. I mean, I think there's some broader programs to get at, and maybe some other opportunities for graduate students. So they've really enjoyed it. But thank you.
Thank you.
If anyone's interested, I did make a handout of the types of stuff we're reading and how we're connecting rhetoric. So I'll just let those go around.
All right, so we're moving at light speed here into the latest things that we're doing. So we're going to hear briefly from Lindsay Sampson, who's directing our Ancient Medicine initiative this fall, and then we'll hear from Jesse about science fiction. I can't wait. Okay, it's a big weekend for us science fiction people out there. Okay, Blade Runner 2049. I'm just saying. All right, Lindsay.
Okay, hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I thought Ryan was going to go first, but
I can see something just really quickly, Lindsay, and I just wanted to point out that from my own perspective, what this shift has done, because I'm hoping it will lead into exactly what you're going to say, but or preempt it a little bit. But in our campus, I am physically separated from the science part part of Franklin and Marshall. I am at one edge of the campus in classics, and neuroscience and biology are on the other side of campus. And the opportunity to teach ancient medicine has brought together those sides of the campus, really, for some of them, for the first time. This is, for most of the we have a very strong pre-med major here at Franklin and Marshall. For most of them, it's the first time they've ever read literature or poetry of any kind in college. And I currently have 3 neuroscience and classics double majors who are in ancient medicine right now. Turns out it's a very natural double major for a lot of people, it turns. There's a sense, perhaps, that if you can't beat them, join them with the STEM, this STEM switch.
Science fiction, which came out with Oxford in 2015. Its companion, Classical Traditions in Modern Fantasy, just came out this year. Likewise, Classics and Comics, Son of the Classics and Comics, and shamelessly plug the forthcoming Frankenstein and its classics, The Modern Prometheus from Antiquity to Science Fiction. So there's been a huge boom in scholarly activity around the topic, and with that, an increasing number of people teaching the material at their own institutions now. And as fun and popular as putting the classics and science fiction in conversation with one another is, I really think the course is important, in part because the other worlds of classical mythology and science fiction use some of the same strategies to comment on the most pressing issues of modernity. Ancient literature and modern science fiction generate cognitive estrangement through their construction of worlds at once familiar and defamiliarized, whether disturbingly uncanny or wondrous. And ultimately, science fiction occupies a mythic space whose estranging distance from the known, the normal, and the now, be it temporal, epistemological, or metaphysical, allows for reflection upon the contemporary world. Since Frankenstein, which would have been impressed about exactly 200 years ago, and is of course subtitled The Modern Prometheus, science fiction has intimately engaged with the marvelous promises of progress and the terrible chaos unleashed by Prometheus' theft of fire. Science fiction is all about the moral ambiguities created in the wake of speculative science. And this is not limited to developments in technology and issues like cloning, artificial intelligence, weapons of mass destruction, and environmental manipulation, but also changes in society and culture. Questions of licit and illicit knowledge are at least as old as Odysseus' desire to hear the siren song of all things that happen on the nourishing earth. And I think in our politically polarized present, I firmly believe that the cultural and temporal distance afforded by the literature of ancient Greece and Rome and the imaginative futures of science fiction can create safe, or at least safer, spaces to start essential but difficult conversations. Classical literature and science fiction each speak to issues of race, gender, ethnicity, inclusion and exclusion, empire and colonization, and ultimately what it means to be human. And to all this, I'll add that the pairing of classics with sci-fi, often banished from the literature shelf at your local Barnes & Noble and relegated to speculative fiction or the like, raises aesthetic questions about canonization and the so-called great divide between high and low art. And irrespective of what is specifically science fictional about the material, I think this class stands to introduce students to reception studies and, I hope in rigorous and theoretically informed ways, to the dynamics of intertextuality. So that's my somewhat impassioned and I hope brief pitch for the material itself. As I mentioned, this past June we held an intense and intensely rich seminar at the CHS. The early portion of the seminar was dedicated to theorizing intertextuality and possible pairings between sci-fi and the classics. After this, we had several panels of participants, some present and some joining virtually from as far away as the UK, presented case studies for course materials drawn from their own interests, and give some idea of the range. Some of the material might be direct receptions in science fiction, so novels that are explicitly based on the Iliad or the Odyssey, for instance, Dan Simmons' Ilium and Olympos, or Doctor Who's Fires of Pompeii episode. But materials also range for just more thematic pairings. So for instance, It'd be fascinating to read Catullus 63, the Addis poem, and a lot of other ancient material on constructions of gender, alongside, say, Ursula Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness. So after these case studies, we finally got down to the brass tacks of plotting out what a digital Sunoikisis course might look like. And we used Norman's leadership course as a template for talking about modules. And while at least several of us have individual modules to contribute, we've elected to begin by teaming up to develop at least 2 rounds of cluster modules. And the idea being that each of these clusters would contain 3 weeks or more of material from which an instructor might draw. And we have a basic arithmetic of aiming at about 7-ish hours of work per week for the students. So 3 weeks or more per cluster, and I say or more because we think that it's important that our materials speak to a range of possible course levels. So for example, I wouldn't hesitate to have a matriculating first-year student read Frankenstein alongside Aeschylus, Hesiod, and Ovid, in translation, of course. But I'd not feel comfortable asking that same first-year student to read from, say, Adorno and Horkheimer's Dialectic of Enlightenment, which is a text that I regularly assign to my more advanced students, and for instance, in a senior seminar course that I taught on classics and sci-fi a couple of years ago. And our hope is that these multi-week clusters, the multi-week format will be helpful for a few reasons. So one, we hope that these clusters will be especially enriched by the collaborative process. And second, that they'll also provide a certain cohesion to multiple iterations of the course. Norman, for example, introduced the module format and concept using using metaphor as an album concept, perhaps even a greatest hits album. And we hope that our course, in all of its versions, will come off as a concept album rather than, say, an incongruous, even Frankensteinian mixtape. So participants brainstormed potential cluster themes and then took a series of votes. And for our first round, we're in the process of developing clusters surrounding gender, extraordinary voyages, monsters, and hybrids, empire, alternate and secret histories, and one around the theme of utopia and dystopia. And on deck for a second round of clusters are time travel, a cluster around the figure of Prometheus, language and languages, immortality, and critical theory. So doing some basic arithmetic based off a minimum 3 weeks per cluster module, these 10 clusters will add up to at least 30 weeks of material, much more than could realistically fit into, say, one 15-week semester. So we hope this will lead to many different iterations of the course. And I'll also add that I think one other benefit for this particular course to doing the 3-week cluster modules, it's one challenge that we face is that science fiction and epic poetry tend to be sprawling genres. And so in a 1-week module, it would be impossible to tell a student, okay, go read Asimov's Foundation and Gibbon's Decline and Fall. But with 3 weeks to play with, I think it opens up the possibilities for instructors to use longer format literature. Despite the wealth of material on the horizon, I think there's still much more room for development, and this is, I suppose, my pitch to recruit others to get involved. There's so many more rich case studies and themes that might be added to the course. And I'll point to what I see as currently a gaping hole in our syllabus. To my chagrin, among those 10 cluster themes, race and racism is not currently represented in the syllabus. And this is despite the fact that since Frankenstein, science fiction has explored essential questions of race, otherness, and Orientalism, and often through discourses that reach back to classical antiquity. So in its completed form, I think this course absolutely needs a module or modules available for teaching these topics. And in concert with that, I think the science fiction theme, I think it would be great to see someone develop a module around Afrofuturism. So I'd like to just close by very much encouraging anybody who would be interested in getting involved, whether it's teaching the course or perhaps contributing to the course in designing modules, whether individual, short 1 week, one-offs, or participating in developing new clusters, to please be in touch with myself or Norman.
Thank you so much. So we're gonna so you've heard references to Norma's leadership course, and so that bodes. I mean, that introduces, I think, a really nice segue to Norman and his group. Norman, Vicky's not online, so I'm hoping that you can.
I saw an email from her saying that she had an emergency.
Oh, okay.
But the nice thing about the Sunoikisis community is that there is a lot of homo forsune among us, and we can actually do each other's parts fairly effectively, although I will never be able to capture Vicky's passion or enthusiasm for the subject. So how are we doing on time? Like how much?
Well, we're running way behind, which is to be expected. Okay.
Okay. Well,
so just charge ahead.
Quick. And did you get the PowerPoint
Oh.
that I sent you? Could you put that up? So while Kenny's bringing up the PowerPoint, let me just echo something that Jesse was alluding to a moment ago that kind of captures what we see as the purpose of this panel. It's really a twofold purpose. One is to sort of extend an invitation to anyone who would like to participate in some of these Sunoikisis projects, learn more about them, or even if you have your own ideas for collaborative projects, maybe float them by one of us. And the other opportunity is just maybe you see something that we're doing that you would like to replicate yourself. Like you don't have to join the Sunoikisis community necessarily. A lot of what we do is really meant to be scalable and available to other people. So to transition then to the note about the leadership course, to me the sort of the kernel of genius behind Sunoikisis is that it invites us to think of the creative process of teaching a course as a collaborative endeavor. I mean, the unfortunate thing about where we all come from is that we're trained to think of what we do as a solitary artistic project. Syllabus creation, teaching the course, the lecturing. We might get input from colleagues from time to time, but by and large we see that as a solitary creative project in the same way that you might think of writing a novel is like that. But those of you who have kids who like animated movies, like my daughter really loves the Kung Fu Panda movies, and she always insists on watching the credits, and I think that's just an excuse to have the television on for just a few more minutes. It's not that she's reading, but if you notice the credits in one of these kinds of projects, there are thousands of creative sources of creative input, and I don't know that our course creation will ever involve a cast of thousands, but we could foresee a future where course creation might involve a cast of dozens of people pitching in greater and lesser ways throughout the course experience, and that really takes me to what I want to say about
Hang
this.
on just a second, Norman. I'm sorry. I'm downloading these.
So what I'm going to talk about here, two things. Vicky was going to talk about the general overview of the two iterations of a leadership course that we have offered so far last year in the fall of 2016 and this year fall of 2017. Two iterations, as Jesse was alluding to before. The courses were conceived of as albums consisting of modules or songs, as we call them. Each module had a song title, and it was all online. You would go to the website, you would see an album cover, you would click on the album cover, and thanks to the genius of John Esposito manipulating the Scalar platform, the album would flip over and you would see the back side with a track listing of the different modules, and you would click on a song and it would take you to that module, and you would be good to go. And the idea was the course experience was an album, and what the instructors and the students
do together is listen to that album and work from that content. So I'll say a little bit about that. That's what Vicky was going to cover, and then I want to say something about the common sessions that we developed as a result of this experience, and kind of say a little bit about what is good about, or what can be good about the common sessions. How are we doing that?
I've got so many things going on here. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. Well, I'll just tell you, you'll see in a moment the first slide, this is a view way of the teaser. The second course that we created for this fall, 2017, was a course devoted entirely to...
oh, wait. Okay. Oh, hang on.
To...
Okay. Well, that was poor Ulrika. Norman, hang on. I'm
right.
so sorry. Okay.
So, so this fall leadership course is devoted entirely to ancient leadership in the era of Donald Trump. So, the cool thing about this collaborative process that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about more in a moment is that we now have a team that is large enough, a dozen faculty contributed to the creation of this course, and we now have a team large enough that you can pretty much create a course in real time. And what I mean by that is you can create a course that is responsive to whatever the current events and issues of the day. You know, we don't ever want to be presentist, right? You know, there is a certain timeliness to what we do, but you know, if there's a rise in white supremacy, or there's a rise in you know, demagoguery, or a critique of fake news, or you know, anything like this, we can develop course in a matter of a month or two, and really have all the content ready to go, have it organized, have it in a format that can be engaged with in really exciting ways. We can do that because we, for this leadership project, we have enough people now with a range of expertise who can do things that you know, no one faculty member could ever achieve on their own.
I'm so sorry. I'm trying to find this.
I think what else I should say.
We've got some serious bandwidth issues here.
Yeah.
I feel like a completely common business course.
Well, you know, we could have a jazz theme, Miles Davis inspired course.
You don't.
Did you want a 5-minute break?
What's that?
You want to take a 5-minute break and see if you can
We can. Do you have it on a flash drive or something like that?
I have it on my computer.
Do you want? Yeah. Let's just get that. That
okay.
would be great. We'll just get Norman's here, and we'll.
It's fine if you don't.
I got a special code from the person, but I don't have access to that. I have it here, sitting right here. I just can't download it.
It's funny, this computer opens PowerPoint.
to open.
It's a good sign.
It's that file right there.
Ancient leaders, there we go. Look at that. Sybil and Donovan in one. Did it just quit on me? What happened?
I think it's just slow. All right.
Okay.
So, as I was saying just a moment ago, the genius behind Sunoikisis is that it is an invitation to think about the course creation and teaching process as collaborative rather than solitary. And the aspect of this that we really focused on for the two leadership courses was the idea that if you had enough faculty with enough focus and diverse areas of expertise, you could actually build the entire content from the readings themselves to the assignments to the context that you would need to appreciate those assignments. So in the fall of 2016, we created a course called Beyond the Boundaries of Fantasia, and many of the module creators, Jim Cafridi is here, who created a module, Christine created a module, John, Kenny, all created modules for this course, and the idea was that it was an introduction to ancient leadership, and the challenge we posed there was that it was an ancient imagining of the future of leadership. The style of the album cover was based on John Lennon's Imagine. It's obviously the column of Trajan there, but it's done up in John Lennon Imagine kind of style. And if you click on the first link there, it would take you, don't do it, Kenny, don't be tempted. It would take you to the course site, and as I say, you would click on the album, and then you would get a track listing of all the different modules for the course. And this is all posted for free, by the way, I should emphasize. Again, this is something that you yourself could easily do on your own if you wanted to with a group of colleagues and set that up.
Yep. I don't know what just happened there.
And as I said, in the second iteration of this course, we were able to pull together a very timely set of content, set of assignments and ideas around the idea of ancient leadership and the era of Donald Trump. So it's exploring ideas of demagoguery, tyranny. There's a module on narcissism, and you read the story of Narcissus and look at the modern psychological construct of narcissism. Look at the Goldwater rule for trying to diagnose a leader for narcissism. There's also a module in there on race and racism and the use of the ancient world to support contemporary notions of white supremacy. John did a module on populism. We actually just completed that this week. So very exciting. And I should mention, it's the first iteration of this course we taught at 8 different institutions across the country. The second iteration, right now we're only doing 2, myself and Mallory Katerine at Tulane. We're teaching it, but in the spring, we're expecting to teach it at a lot of other places, and we're trying to do a lot of work right now to involve what Lindsay was calling earlier non-matriculating students. If there's anybody in the larger U.S. community or population who want to take this course with the guidance of a trained instructor, they can do this in cohorts of 5 people. And I'll say more about the course if you want. Since we're pressed for time, the other thing I wanted to talk about, Kenny, if you advance the slide. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the common sessions. And I'm speaking of the common sessions that we created for last year's fall 2016 course. We had 3 main goals for these. One, probably the biggest goal, was to try to build a sense of community among faculty and students while taking the course. We acknowledge that quite often the courses that we offer are the weird ones, the ones that students may find their way into because it's a gen ed experience and they don't necessarily get a sense for how the course might fit in to what they're doing, and it's good to expose them to other faculty and other students who are trying to make meaning out of the same material at the same time. As Hal alluded to earlier, this is a great opportunity. The common session is a great opportunity to share the expertise of different faculty, and when we taught the course in fall of 2016, I think we must have had probably 24 different participants, different faculty members at one time or another chiming in and sharing their expertise. Finally, another big goal is for these common sessions is it's a great way to experiment with new ways of engaging with the material. We really try to imagine that this is not just more content, it's not just more class time, but the experience can be freer, more experimental. We can try lots of different things, and I'm going to give you a breakdown of what those are in just a moment. Just so you know, in general, the format of the common session is that they happen once a week throughout the semester at a scheduled time, usually sometime in the evening. They happen for 1 hour. It's a Google Hangout, which is free to do, and you can record it so that students who can't watch it can come back and see it later. And while the Hangouts are going on, there is a simultaneous chat room that we host on Slack, so that you can't get all the students on a Hangout at one time, although it's fun sometimes to just share the link to the Hangout and say, hey, we've got room for 2 more. Does anybody want to jump on? And students will jump on sometimes, and there can be a lot of fun and spontaneity from that. But you can have as many as 30 or 40 students in the chat room at any one time, and you usually have a chat room moderator, somebody who's paying attention to the common session and filling in questions and trying to stoke the students to talk. The biggest thing that we learned about what is a successful common session from this course was that they seem to work best in an environment where you have designated segments of about no more than 8 minutes, where there's going to be some featured content for 8 minutes, and then you're going to move on to something else, something that is rapidly changing perspective for the students, because as many of you might imagine, you can get on these common sessions sometimes, and the faculty member feels that it's his or her responsibility to hold forth for the entire, what was supposed to be a 15-minute presentation is suddenly a 45-minute presentation, and then there's no room to do anything else. So we tried to identify, and I'll tell you a little bit about what these were. We tried to identify about 5 to 6 8-minute segments that would fill in each hour. And one is, so some of the regular shows that you would see, or the segments you would see in these common sessions, were things we call deeper cuts, where a faculty member would spend 8 minutes just saying, here's the latest research on some aspect, and you just knock it out really quickly, share bibliography, and move on. We had another section called Students Corner, where we would just, for 8 minutes bring in some students, and the idea would be for them to talk to each other across institutions, however they wanted to do it. One of the most successful modes of this was just to have the students interview one another about what they were getting out of the course, what they liked, how they thought it was relevant, things like that. And you can even have a student at one institution and volunteer to interview a student at another institution. And that can be very, very exciting. Another segment we did was called Notes from the Classroom, where we just invited faculty members to say, like, what did you do this week that worked? What did you try in class that you might want to try? What was a theme that students really liked, or a discussion that really took fire? And could you summarize it? Did you try something that didn't work? Did you try something that fell flat? We also did dramatic reenactments. These got quite creative at times. Christine's students at Findlay, this was amazing. They whipped up an entire puppet reenactment of the Catalanarian conspiracy that they did on one of these hangouts. By the way, if you just search Sunoikisis Ancient Leadership 2016, these are all on a channel on YouTube, and you can find Christine's students. They were the first segment of that comment session, and it was really, they got puppets. Where did you get the puppets from? Art department or something?
No, the education. There's a College of Education library, and they're like hand puppets for teaching that educators use, and these students kind of graded that area and said that they were education majors.
Oh, I didn't realize
yeah, they were actually education majors. That's right.
Yeah, that was a great creative use of the dramatic reenactment. You can also do readings from plays or readings of speeches, things like this. We did have, during this time, we also did a few long-form interviews. We invited Brooke Manville, who's a former classicist, but spent 30, 40 years of his career as a leadership consultant, management consultant, who volunteered to do an interview on the value of Socrates for leadership. And the students got to ask him questions. I interviewed him. It was a really great time. We also featured regional interest stories. Anytime there was a faculty member who had something going on at his or her campus, for 5 or 6 minutes, you could feature that. Niall Slater Emory did a piece on the Art History Museum there, the collection there at Emory. Another thing that we did that was very successful, sometimes we would do surveys at the beginning of class, at the beginning of the session, and then the students would fill out the survey, or they would do something like that, and then we would come to it at the end and talk about the results of the survey. That was a way of keeping interest, making sure anytime you do a survey and you promise to show the results at the end, you can kind of guarantee that many of the students will stick it out for the duration. So that was a lot of fun. And if you would go to the challenges and pitfalls, just briefly here, these are pretty self-evident. Balancing faculty and student involvement. Gwen mentioned this before. Faculty tend to want to fill the empty air, and students are sometimes reluctant to speak. Students sometimes see the comment sessions as extra work, where they can't make the schedule. Students live hyper-scheduled lives. It's very hard. The fact that we record them, is one way around that, but it remains a challenge, and we should not paper over that. Timing. Presenters often don't have a good sense of how long it takes to cover a topic. I said the segments tended to last 8 minutes. If you, it's better to tell people to speak for 5 to 6 minutes, and then if they go to 8, that's fine. That's fine. Technology, finally, that goes. You've seen that on display here. Sometimes faculty need to learn the technology, and even when you do, it can be a challenge. And if you would go to the last slide, Kenny, and I will be done. In my final analysis, the interinstitutional and extra-institutional common session as pedagogy is still in its infancy, but shows great promise for becoming integral to the traditional classroom experience. It has the potential to orient students to a broader academic community and even foster collaborative research. That would be something to aspire to down the road. Successful sessions require a fair amount of advanced planning and rehearsal. I can't stress that enough. We had a whole Excel spreadsheet of what each common session was going to consist of and who was going to be responsible for each segment. We had to do this in advance, and it worked very well, but it is a lot of extra time and planning. Faculty need to acclimate themselves to new technology and new modes of engagement with students. Students need to see common sessions not as additional work, but as a chance to find new ways to appreciate and master the subject. So you really have to sell them on it that it's not more work, but that it's community building. It should be fun, and it should help them with what they're already working on. So cool. All right then.
So sorry about your PowerPoint
No.
moment. I think we're. So do you want to continue and introduce the next?
Oh, is Ulrika?
Ulrika, she's there.
Yeah. Hey, Ulrika. And I meant to mention too, Ulrika created a module for the first leadership course and was very supportive of the second one as well.
Okay, am I on?
You're on. You're on.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. So I am just going to present very briefly what I did with this Sunoikisis collaboration. I sort of took a part of it and ran with it to create a course around civic engagement at my own institution. So I am a professor of classics and archaeology at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. So one of the 8 institutions that participated in the first Sunoikisis course. And before I start, I just have to sort of express my appreciation for Kenny and Norman and Mallory and all of Joel and all of the other people who participated in that extremely fruitful collaboration. I've never been a part of anything like that. It was really a meeting of the minds and had an impact, a wide impact on students, matriculated and non-matriculated, all over the world, frankly. So thanks for that opportunity. And so what I did, I had originally worked on a material culture module for the original Sunoikisis leadership course. And one of the things that I observed while I was working with the course, I wasn't teaching that quarter, but I was sort of observing the course, and I was observing the student reactions, and I was participating in the common sessions. And one of the things that I've started to realize is that people who don't know much about classics can be especially receptive to learning from it. And so even though I generally, in my teaching, resist oversimplification of the ancient sources, I started to think that perhaps I could reach a lot more people, students who won't necessarily become classicists, but might have an interest in it, by taking a message from an ancient source and building a class structure out of it. And so the one that I chose, I'm just going to check in real quick. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes, of course. You're doing great.
Great. Okay. So the one that I chose was that, and this is a vast oversimplification, but it was Aristotle's message that being a good person is closely tied to helping your community become a better community. Hello, everybody. So that civic engagement and personal ethics are very yes. And so at my institution, we teach in teams. And so I had the opportunity to pair with a U.S. historian to develop a class around and civic engagement. We are calling it, it's actually, we're on the quarter system, and so we just started 2 weeks ago, so this is very new. We called it Inventing the Citizen, the History of Political Action and Its Limits. And I am teaching with Dr. Brad Proctor, who joined us at Evergreen from UNC via Yale this year. And it's been really important to have the USXP part, as well as ancient Greece and Rome, because the founders of the constitution of the state really, it's become very obvious how much they look to the classics, even in the second weeks of classics. And Dr. Proctor is illuminating the extent to which they had sort of the ancient world in mind. And so it provides connective tissue for the current environment that these students are in. Let's see, what else did I want to say about that? Right. So I guess I wanted to say that even if your institution doesn't necessarily have a formal arrangement for teaching teams, I would encourage you to try and do something like that, pair with a sister discipline. It can really shed new light on the classics. So the other thing that we were able to do is we were able to apply for and get a what's called a Periclean Faculty Leadership Grant. Kenny, I don't know, can you bring up the Pericles site?
Okay, so we're having some really difficult bandwidth issues here and getting access to it. So I sadly can't get. Well, I will try, but so continue on,
okay,
and I'll try to do this. So continue, and I'll work on this.
Okay. You actually don't necessarily need to. I can look at it here real quick. So there's an institution called Project Pericles. It's an affiliation of colleges that have dedicated themselves to promoting civic engagement and community work. Evergreen happens to be a part of it. They call themselves Project Pericles kind of hilariously or very awkwardly. And on their history page, I'll just read sort of what their narrative is. So their mission statement under the history page says higher education and the legacy of Pericles. And they credit, actually I won't read the whole thing.
Okay.
They essentially credit Pericles.
Ulrika, we've got it up online for you.
Oh, you do?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, if you go to the history page there, you can sort of see the narrative, which uncritically credits a very one-dimensional Pericles was promoting an equal society. So I won't go into how problematic that is. I will say that when I applied for the grant, I pointed this out to them, that this is a complete narrative. I got the grant, but they did change the language, so I don't know what to make of that. So they give us a very small amount of money, actually. And this money is intended to fund, and here I'm quoting from their literature, an activity that brings diverse campus and community members together, addresses current public community issues, and enlivens democratic debate and civil discourse. This activity could be a symposium, a public performance, a community service activity with a community organization, a political advocacy project, or another type of activity. Yes, so the course is ongoing right now, so I don't have any results to report quite yet. I don't know yet exactly what the civic engagement part is going to look like. In contrast to what the Pericles project people intend for us to do, which is to have the faculty plan this project, we are letting our students decide what it is that they want to do with it. We're lucky to live in the capital of Washington State, and so we have a lot of opportunities here to really do some intensive community work sort of at the legislative level as well, if that's what they choose to do. So the students have already expressed a number of really great ideas, and I can tell you that many of these ideas that they have could be done with zero funding, in fact, that the little bit of money that we get from the Pericles Foundation is just going to be icing on the cake. So again, I don't have any results to report yet. Check back in with me in March, and then I will have some more concrete takeaways from how it is to connect classics and civic engagement. But in general, in conclusion, I would just encourage everybody to broaden the reach of classics by selectively, by simplifying the message, pairing it with sister disciplines, and utilizing grants, yes, but also already existing structures at your colleges that connect the college to the community. So we have an office called the Community Center for Community-Based Learning and Action that helps organize internships and community-based activities. And so to really, it's not difficult to go outside of the ivory tower and connect to your communities using classics. That's it.
Thank you, Ulrika. And now Joel Christensen at Brandeis University and Mallory, Monica, and Katerine are going to speak on creating intercollegiate learning communities. And Joel, by the way, as you'll soon hear, has one of the best headsets. Speaking like he's going to sound like he's in a helicopter. That sounds super awesome. Get ready for this.
Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Good morning.
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. So I'm sorry I'm not with you guys today, but I'm here virtually. Mallory and I are just going to split the two basic topics about community into faculty and student groups to start.
So I started talking about faculty. As Norman probably knows best, the most important thing for creating an inter-university community with faculty is engagement, is consistent engagement among faculty members. And without really planning it, we did it in the following fashion. So first, Norman and I started talking about the leadership project probably 2 or 3 years ago. And we ended up having a series of events, projects that we did together that gave us a sense of community that was really instrumental in bringing together lots of new people into the project and new ideas. So we started, just to give you a template, with a roundtable discussion at the SCS meeting in 2016, which allowed interested faculty we didn't know about to brainstorm. It's where we really first met Mallory, and she's been sort of the engine that's been running this for a bit. You know, we saw how many people could be involved in this ongoing work, and it sort of laid the foundation for what we did next. We created a working group based on those who were interested, and we brainstormed about what our next step was going to be. And we had 2 things. We had a short conference at UTSA in that same spring, and then we started to design the template for the course that we ran. And so I think having multiple events where people get together and then having a project sort of naturally creates a community because we're constantly engaged with each other. And so as we moved into the delivery of the course content, we had familiarity with each other to build on what we were trying to do in the course, which involved using the platform Slack. We had some regular Google Hangout meetings like this one. And we tried to do some of the YouTube broadcasting. And I think Mallory will talk more about the success of those on the student side. On the faculty side, we all get pretty frazzled during the semester, and I can say that I didn't love these things as well as I could have, but it was nice to see the familiar faces. So if I could draw a theme out of this, it's that the consistent contact and the regular engagement made a big difference in creating comfort, familiarity, and that sense of community that I think has been so valuable for this process. So now I'll pass over to Mallory for a bit.
We can't hear you, Mallory. We can't. Maybe is the mic on your earbud working?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Now we can hear
great.
you.
In terms of connecting the students and building a sense of intercollegiate community with them, I would say that in general, students were really excited about the prospect of connecting with people at other schools. But in reality, they were really anxious and really insecure about doing so. What we did in fall 2016, when we taught the course then, where we had 7 different participating institutions, there were 2 main ways that students could interact with each other. One was the Slack group that all participants had access to, and that we hoped would be a platform for continuous conversation as the semester went along, and was sort of the live chat feed for during the common sessions. But what I think we found is that students tended to be very shy and weren't sure how or when to join the Slack conversation, and were also really self-conscious about saying something dumb. And I think another issue was actually in that version of Slack, you couldn't thread comments. So it made it harder for people to sustain a discussion on one topic. So that was sort of a barrier to participation for students. The other main way that students could connect was through the common sessions. So when we met once a week, often what we would do is that different schools would lead different segments of the common session. Occasionally, I think maybe once or twice, we had students at one university interviewing students at another university about things happening at their different campuses. And we
the faculty and moderators tried to encourage the students to ask questions of each other. Varying degrees of success. Occasionally this worked out well, but I think that considering this now, sort of integrating these collaborative activities into course assessment at the different universities is probably the only way to ensure that students will take advantage of this. They need some kind of incentive. So assigning something like study pals or co-interviewees at partner institutions, or providing particular class times where we can have our students engage with peers at different institutions. But of course, logistical challenges abound with that because we all have totally different course schedules. So that's what we tried to do in fall 2016. This fall, in the course that Norman and I are teaching, we've abandoned Slack, and we are instead using a Facebook group that is a common informal conversation platform. And I think it's still picking up steam. We're still kind of early in this process, but I think it's been a little bit more organic and productive. The two main issues are, again, shyness of students, and also that since Facebook is not as cool as it used to be for college-age students, not all of them have Facebook accounts because they're beyond that. So that's been a little bit of an issue with encouraging engagement. But we are now having students post brief introductions to themselves, which kind of helps to break down barriers and break the ice a little bit. I know my students have been posting some homemade ancient leadership memes, which have lightened the mood a little bit, and news articles that are relevant to modules, which have sparked conversations both among students and content creators, because we also have all the people who created modules are part of the Facebook group. And one recent example, just to end my section here on this, that really stood out to me as a way that this was working better. There were recently protests of James Comey at Howard, and we were just talking about race and racism and antiquity in America, and so I was able to throw out there to the Facebook group, hey, was anyone at Howard there? What are your reactions? And one of Norman's students is actually a leader in the group that that actually undertook the protest, disputed his group's methods. And so we were able to talk about a relevant thing both to current events and to our course in a way that we wouldn't have otherwise. So back to you, Joel.
Thank you, Mallory. Is my voice back?
Yep, you're all set. Yep. Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
So we got a lot out of the process of collaborating, but there are some challenges that we need to think more about in the future. One of them obviously is burnout. We have a lot to do as professors, regardless of adding a new project and trying to learn new. Another one that I included, and I think we did at other schools, is a concern about curricular control. What does it mean to have a common syllabus? And so I found myself at both UTSA and Brandeis having to explain that assessment was still under my control and I was still involved with writing the syllabus. So there's an extra level of communication that's required on the institutional side, as well as sort of the personal disciplinary side. And this, as we all know, once you get in the semester and the long slog of running classes and grading, you sort of lose the energy you have at the outset of the project. So that's where the sense of community is really important, because we're in a partnership doing it together. But there is a downside of the fact that that administrators and people putting together tenure portfolios don't really know what to do with these things, right? What does the taught course mean? What is it worth? If you create a new syllabus with others at another university, how is it weighed? For those of us who are involved in the process, we know that it was incredibly transformative. It actually took a lot more work than a normal course I might whip up, which might say something about my courses, unfortunately. But it's definitely another area where we need to work on communication, where we can demonstrate that we're doing something, to use the dirty word, innovative, that really rests on ancient and important strategies of pedagogy and collaboration. Technology, again, to sort of round out this discussion, was as much a hindrance as it was a facilitator in this. For some of us, it's easy to go from Slack to Google Hangouts and Scalar, just to add something else to the mix. But the ease of using the tools doesn't really make up for the fact that there are so many different windows you have to have open, so many different, let's say, portals you have to keep on checking. So making these tools use a habit is a problem. Now, students at my university have actually adapted Slack and are using it as for graduate student notifications to coordinate as a group. But I think this is going to be an exception rather than a rule. So I think Mallory and Norman's sort of choice to use an existing multimedia platform is probably helpful. We could try Twitter as well if we wanted to. But again, we have to find out platforms that our communities are already using and how do we capitalize upon them? What can we add into Google? What can we add into Facebook that will make it possible for us to make community building a normal part of our days? So students like the idea of an intercollegiate community, but if this participation in the community isn't incentivized and structured, only a small percentage of them will actually reach out to their peers at another campus. And as faculty members, we have to put the energy in to make sure that we build and maintain our relationships with other instructors so we can sort of act as, let's say, models for students. And now Mallory's going to come back and talk about some of the benefits that we acquire.
Before I do, just to tack on to the last thing that Joel said, I think that one of the things that the faculty community had that the students don't is we actually had IRL physical meetups that helped us build community. And I think that's something that we could consider in the future, and other Sunoikisis courses could consider in the future, is having undergraduate colloquia where they can actually get together and students from different courses can get together and have that face time that really lets you bond and build a sense of true community. But to move to the various benefits, which I'm sure some of them are obvious, and two of these are tangible. One thing that I found, and I'm sure we all know, that being an academic can be really lonely, even within your home department. There are very few of us who are lucky enough to have another colleague who works on something that has 50% overlap in what you do. That would be remarkable. Yeah, we're mostly the only person who does whatever we do. And so while our home colleagues may be interested in what we're working on or may have tangential connections, we're often left to ourselves to foster our research and teaching interests. So the ancient leadership community has really been like a new kind of academic home. For me, certainly, I don't want to speak for everyone else, that even though we are not all physically in the same space, there's a special kind of focused support, encouragement, and sense of belonging that makes this group feel different and gives you that different sense than a department might. So it's made me feel more like I'm part of a global community of scholars than other projects I've worked on before. On top of that, it's always helpful to see how other people work with the challenges and opportunities that their home institutions and their different student populations have. And I've found that that perspective has really enriched my own teaching and research and career development. So it's kind of just the general benefits of networking. So we all learned a lot from seeing what other instructors were doing with the same sort of material. And that was part of the benefit of the common sessions, especially when we broke up the segments into different institutions holding on to that bit. We got to see completely different treatments of the same stuff. And even though administrators don't really know what to do with these projects, in terms of promotion and tenure, they're also really excited about things that look interdisciplinary and things that show their institution's connection to a global scholarly community. So if you can talk about it in the right way, I had the same experience with Joel, that I had to explain to administrators how I was in fact teaching a whole course and had more than made up an entire course. But once they heard that and understood how it worked, there's been a lot of support and excitement about it. So I think it's a matter of knowing how to explain what this really is, and that can then open up doors for you at your home institution. So on the student side, as we said, even though they don't always take advantage of the chances that they had to connect with peers at other schools, the very fact that they had the opportunity to and that they knew that other people were working on the same things seemed to enrich the course experience for them and make them feel like they were part of something exciting and unusual and not what their peers were doing in other classes. So I think that gave it a greater sense of seriousness than some of the other courses I've taught where it's just me teaching at my institution. And a final point is that just as the faculty benefited from seeing how different people teach and deal with material, I think students benefited a lot from being exposed to a whole community of faculty with different teaching styles and backgrounds and attitudes towards the material. And this really allowed them to see a lot of different ways of doing classics, whatever that means. But I think that diversity of approaches and people allowed more students to imagine themselves as also capable of doing classics or being a classicist. And I think that was really beneficial and not something you as a single instructor could ever provide to your students. So that's all we've got, unless Joel wants to add anything more.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Well, on the topic of technical possibilities and challenges, let's have one of our technical gurus come over here, John Esposito, who's working at UNC Greensboro and 6th Street Technologies. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you have your laptop? Do you want me to do you want me to show something?
I don't think there's actually going to be time for that.
Oh, okay.
Plus, he's already talked about Scalar, so.
Oh, okay. Do you want me to bring up Scalar?
Yeah, you could actually bring up one of the Scalar sites. Yeah. But so there's a little bit of theoretical component to this talk, but mostly it's going to be about applying some of the Zoom aims that we've been talking about, the kinds of collaboration in 2 particular platforms that take advantage of something the web can do, and then other things I think besides the web have not been able to do as well. As a sort of tongue-in-cheek response to this question of how do you explain what you're doing in one of these courses to members of the faculty, I proposed 2 new words: syllabus and somality, for the kind of camaraderie you develop when you're only face-to-face. But the reason I mention that is because I think a number of the challenges that people have been talking about here have to do with things that have been solved or addressed or raised by different forms of technology, communication technology, since the origin of writing, possibly. So if you think about what writing does, right, and think about some of the early uses of writing, which are often administrative, writing allows you to control or to abstract from spatiotemporal separation, right? If you write something down on a piece of stone, somebody 1,000,000 years from now or 1,000 years from now might be able to read it. Somebody 1,000 miles away might be able to read it. That comes with not being able to control who you're sending it to. So what might have originally been intended as a one-to-one communication, let's say, ends up getting dropped by some postman on the Royal Road, and then thousands of years later, we're reading about some angry Persian's inability to get the inventory that he had paid for at some point later. Those are sometimes in modern web contexts treated as privacy and identity concerns. So it's not just like who am I, but also who am I talking to, and then what will people know about me when I say something. But one of the things that the web has originally allowed us to do is to abstract from the worries while keeping some of the benefits of those separations. By which I mean, in the early web, one of the dreams of the web was precisely something like pure communication, like anonymity, was essential for open communication, or we might now say that multiple personae that you try on when you have different Facebook profiles or something, which Facebook is trying to kill, are essential for really open communication, so that rather than being embarrassed that I'm going to say something stupid, I can say something under a name that nobody else knows, and then maybe I'll actually learn. Again, the downside to that is that maybe I'll say something horrible and vicious, and nobody will be able to punch me in the face as a result, and so there's no correction in that feedback loop. But the advantage to not having the correction is also that a correction that makes you scared can't crush you before it happens. So a lot of my thought on the subject, incidentally, comes from Doug Engelbart, the inventor of the mouse. He has an amazing paper which has its own website, 1962paper.org, because it is the 1962 paper called Augmenting Human Intellect, which is precisely about the issue of how you communicate with minds, how you join minds on problems, and how face-to-face communication is not great at joining minds on problems, because a million, if you're talking in terms of just information, right, many, many more times the amount of information in face-to-face communication is nonverbal and non-conceptual and has to do with the stuff that everybody is subconsciously paying attention to that has to do with your survival and your norepinephrine and dopamine stuff. And that can hinder scaling of problem solving. So when Doug Engelbart talks about this, he says, the great thing about programming, for example, is that it allows you to join minds purely for the sake of problem solving, not for the sake of interpersonality, not for the sake of building relationships or building a community or survival or something like that. This, I think, is absolutely fascinating, and I think it is true about the way that programming works. But the exact modes, and you can see that this issue that Engelbart raises is partly about the exact modes in which inter-mind communication occurs. So for Engelbart, having pure text communication is essential. For him, it's a programming language is essential because it gets rid of everything else. The other things are good though. I think when we have to actually teach a class, when I stand up in front of students, for example, the exact number of students and the exact layout of the room makes a huge difference to how I communicate, how I feel, but also what I say and what the students even get out of it. Part of the physical modality issue is scaling, right? That's always an issue when you're teaching a class. And in digital terms, scaling is one of the problems that is very explicitly addressed by modern cloud technologies. You have to theorize how to scale not many people talking, but how to scale many computers talking. And one of the problems I think with the platforms that have developed over the past 15 years or so, like Facebook, for example, is that they're not actually very good at scaling at a very deep level. People still have deep conversations one-on-one on these platforms and shallow conversations one-to-many. I think there's a parallel, in other words, in those modalities that we have in existing platforms with the small classroom, big classroom problem, which is totally different interactivity levels. Right? Now, that is possibly something unavoidable for a large-scale communication effort. But when you have several different ways of communicating about the same either problem or within the same community, I think you can match up, you can build a balance in which some modalities have their negatives canceled out by other modalities. So for example, it is very hard in a face-to-face digital video communication like this to interrupt other people. It's like, what are you, because the really, really quick feedback loop we get from somebody talking, which says, I'm still talking, don't interrupt me, or I'm okay with interrupting, you don't really get face-to-face because of split millisecond issues, and also because of pheromones and stuff that you don't even get in visual medium at all. So it's easier often for a really serious back and forth, true like request response kind of stuff, to happen in pure text form, in real time. This is one of the things that Slack can be very good at, or any kind of chat system like originally like IRC could be really good at. You can have a deep conversation in one place without lots of distractions about that conversation, and you can have another deep conversation in another place at the same time, but still maintain those different threads in your head. You can't really do that face-to-face at all. Even if in person, it's very hard, at least for me, at meetings, to have like 4 conversations going on at once. There are stories of people who were able to do this. One of the most hilarious and famous is that this isn't interactive, but Thomas Aquinas used to talk much faster than his scribes, so he would have 4 scribes writing at a time. He would dictate one text to this person, and then this person, then this person, and would go around in a circle so they could all catch up. But that's absurd, not interactive, and doesn't really work face-to-face, but does work in chat. I also say this from a bit of a personal experience because the woman that I eventually married, we met online in a chat room first of all, and it turns out that when we met in person, we were basically the same personality-wise, because it was quite possible to build a kind of a deep personal connection and really get to know someone by chatting. I also mentioned that example because one of the issues you also deal with in the classroom, I think, without institutional problems, is very different rhythms of communication. So neurotypicality versus neuroatypicality is sometimes taken as a function of which sorts of modalities of sense processing do you engage with interpersonally versus do other people engage with interpersonally? How do you relate the verbal to the nonverbal and all of that? And again, in face-to-face, you can't control that. People who have a certain type of mental constitution or brain structure aren't super good at face-to-face communication, but they may be amazing at typing communication, or they may be amazing at typing communication for certain types of topics and not for others. So I think, again, as a teacher in a face-to-face classroom, one of the problems we face is neuroatypical students don't want to talk in front of a bunch of people, and then neurotypical students who love getting up and making speeches love to talk in front of a bunch of people, and that may or may not actually correlate to the value they add to conversation. But some neurotypical students who don't like talking in front of a bunch of people may be okay broadcasting, in typing, maybe not be okay with that, may be okay with one-on-one conversations when typing. So in some of these Slack channels, I don't know if this actually happened with students, but sometimes during collaborative sessions with faculty, individuals would talk on the side while someone else was broadcast talking without taking away from the conversation. Right? This happened particularly in the classics and sci-fi Sunoikisis session. There were a whole bunch of side conversations going on, but everyone was still paying attention because they were actually engaged. And that allows you to allow engaged students, I guess, who are not super happy with this one universal physical spatiotemporal space modality, but also, I think, allows you to engage students that are otherwise bored. Maybe my lecture takes 30% of your brain. Maybe every conversation takes 30% of your brain, but then you'll be engaged if you're having 3.5 conversations at once, right? I think this is actually true, and sometimes it feels like we all lament the lack of attention that people have or something, but maybe it's because I'm young and drink too much coffee. But I also get really bored in lectures, so I kind of feel like again, in that example of the Sunoikisis classics and science fiction, I was more engaged with everything, including the broadcast conversation, while I was chatting with other individuals or subgroups of individuals about what's going on. And that's something that the web allows that pre-web communication just didn't allow. It didn't have real-time, threadable conversations until you had the web. That, again, on Slack in particular, the introduction of threads, I think, makes a huge difference. If you can't thread things, then a conversation is just one big stream. But when you can thread things, you can have multiple conversations going on at once, and that you can come back to months or even years later. Slack is not great for that. Forums are good for that. Facebook is not great for that. Most modern advertising-focused algorithms aren't great for coming back to a conversation years later because they want you to engage at the moment because you're going to buy at the moment. But the medium of the web is super great at that. So Fora, for example, or a platform like Quora are excellent at saying, somebody said this years ago, and now I have something to say in response. Maybe I will say something in response. And that conversation can go on over time, again, in a way that wasn't really possible. I'm talking about threaded, asynchronous, persistent conversations before the web, or before the internet at least. So that is maybe a useful medium. I don't know if this is possible, but I was wondering if it would be possible to somehow have the conversations across not just institutions, but across semesters and years, and eventually decades, keep going on. Because again, these things do happen on the web, they can happen on the web. They do happen in, for example, deep levels in open source technology. And the medium requires pretty much just the ability to thread, the ability to control the chunks of the units threaded, and the ability to make arbitrary connections between one utterance and another utterance. And actually email is super good at that. So for example, the world's most sophisticated open source collaborative project, the development of the Linux kernel, is still conducted via email, because you can thread things in email, and you can thread things from yesterday, from today, from 10 years ago, just as easily as you can. So transcending the barriers of time within a conversation, again, is something that I think as classicists we're sort of implicitly doing. We're having this conversation with Herodotus, but why not with like Joe Smith 50 years ago, or 200 years ago, or 1 year ago? And those are the, very broadly speaking, the kind of the theoretical ideas here. I don't know how much time I have left.
Well, we sort of need to just go on to our next presentation. But that was, I mean, any final comments?
Not really, just I recommend, there were a couple of things I was going to show you about the scalar, but I can post a link to that later. So the scalar is actually very good at combining, I think, levels of temporal engagement, because it makes it easy to sort of hop in and out of different comments on, or different levels of amount of text that you want to see on a related page, rather than saying I'm on this page, or I'm on this page, or I'm on this page. It's easy to go, I'm on this page, then there's a little pop-up, then I can go deeper if I like, I can see more pictures if I like, and that ability to choose your path through the level of engagement is something Scalar is actually really good at, I think. But it's easy to just explore that if you explore the site.
Okay. Thank you so much. All right, so we've been talking a lot about interactivity and about the possibilities of the web, but there are also a number of issues associated with the creation of these materials, and John mentioned one of that, about the sort of the modularity, the depth that we can go, and that sort of thing. And so now we want to look at another internet project, and this is germane to some of the conversations and topics that have come up about race, and so if we can get Caroline to come up here and talk about the IO project as we go hurtling across the Mediterranean, I think, is where we want to go, right?
So I guess to separate from all the things that came before is that I'm still very much in the development phase of this project, and so I was fortunate enough to have a year and a half of like developing content and playing around with with modular content. It's an outgrowth of my teaching at Howard. I pair a lot of ancient texts with later Africana receptions, and so as you can imagine, mapping reception theory on the web is challenging for many reasons that John probably would speak to better than I could. So I'm kind of grappling with that and trying to also deal with access issues. A lot of these texts are no longer in print, and then a lot of things are in copyright. It's also a lot of different, it's not just text, so I deal with a lot of visual material, a lot of archival material, and so it's been a real challenge to kind of bring all of those resources to bear. So anyway, I guess I could show, one of the big concerns I have is, and this came out in my teaching, I would try to teach the ancient text and then a later reworking and then flip the temporal so that there wasn't this hierarchical implied borrowing. And then you realize then you start peeling back all the layers to a lot of these receptions, and there's a lot of mediations that perhaps, like when we do this one-to-one correlation, it's almost a false correlation, that there is a lot of different mediations. And so trying to map that, and also because I work with colleagues across the country at many different levels, I was very interested in the development phase to not just cater to the university, but also to the community, to high school teachers. So to try to come up with a way that they could modular content and have, so can we just go to the next slide? So this is the entry, the landing page, and so in course connections is probably more of what we've seen today in terms of trying to give examples of how to insert the modular content into existing courses. Because also I'm trying to reach out to a lot of my colleagues in Black World Studies and African American Studies, and so that they can come to it not just from classics, but also in other disciplines. And also I realize that, I mean, I'm fortunate at Howard I can teach a course that focuses on Africana receptions, but I wanted to make sure that my modular content could then be inserted into other courses that are already in the curriculum at other institutions. So if you teach a course on myth, and I'll show one of the modules, so you could, and you're doing the story of Niobe, you could then integrate so Phyllis Wheatley and other later receptions of that particular myth. And so if it's, the flexibility is what I wanted to make sure to use, then you could go as deep as you want and in different kinds of contexts. So in this way you kind of miss out, but I could see it pairing with the interinstitutional teaching that is based on the website or comes out of the online resource. So this is the landing page, and then below will be sort of the modular content, and I go to the next one. And so one of the challenges, again, as I was saying about trying to map the receptions, this is a lot of the reception theory has been struggling and grappling with the different ways of doing that, and so we came up with this idea of doing sort of a choose your own adventure, if you will, panels at the bottom. Like so the tiles lead you down different paths, and they can connect in different ways to other tiles. These pose a whole different set of challenges. How deep do you want to go in that at each of the ones, or do you want to keep it sort of left so they can keep going back to the main page? So anyway, as I say, I haven't worked through all of the issues. This is still very much in the beginning phase, but I think this in some ways then doesn't prioritize one point of entry over the other. And so that was something that I felt very important in this material. So I found, so again, these are problems that a lot of people have. Just even to the level of translations. So I'm exploring the module of Phyllis Wheatley and her reworking of Niobe in distress. And so she uses Ovid in their title, I should have said this, and then Richard Wilson's painting. But again, did she have access to the painting itself, when she was over in England, or was she looking at an engraving and et cetera? And so like going through all of the different mediations, I guess you could say, and the arguments of did she know Latin, you can see from the poem that she can, and so it's like how do you then represent all of that, but in an exploratory way, so that you're letting whoever is using the module find and discover and make those kinds of connections. And so just the challenges again of putting the text up and having, how do you make these connections was very challenging. So we're just playing around with the access to the different, how much text can you put on the page? The web is very much visually oriented, and a lot of images are still in copyright. So there's like a lot of issues like that. And so this is just some of the things that with the comparative, like the Uffizi, I can't have access to the original Niobe, but I can get, thankfully, by this German photographer, one of the mini plaster cast copies of it produced in the 19th century. So anyway, but you can see this is the central figure of Niobe in Wilson's painting, and how so you can bring in a lot of archaeology, you can bring in a lot of, so later receptions through the plaster cast. I was talking to Annette at Cornell about this, and so they had a wonderful plaster cast collection there, and so a lot of people were interacting with the ancient world in the 19th century through the plaster collections that couldn't go overseas, and so it's interesting to sort of bring that back into it. So again, it's like you're connecting with the ancient world, but through these other mediations, and so exploring that. Can we go to the next one? I'm just trying to, I know we don't have a lot of, oh, sorry, that's the last one. So anyway, all to say is that I have very few answers at this point, but just sort of I guess I'm interested in having collaborators on this project to create more modules, and then hopefully we will, at a future date, put them together in courses. And I want to see how it would work in the different types of courses, so that, obviously what I myself am teaching at Howard is slightly different. But so far, the response, I've done these presentations and playing around with the modules with some high school teachers have been really successful. And my colleagues with the CAAS Africana receptions of ancient Greece and Rome, our new society is we're going to hopefully put some of the content that is in copyright behind a wall, so that we can use this material across institutions. And so anyway, so that's one of the...
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, we're out of time, all right? Hopefully what some of this did today, and I'm so grateful to Norman for really spearheading this whole project, is to give us a glimpse of what's going on out there, and to promote the notion that we can collaboratively do some really interesting and amazing things out there. And that we all acknowledge that there are certain barriers to being able to do this. We've experienced some of them today. But the possibilities out there are really, really so amazing that it really behooves us to try to experience some of these things and to plug into these resources that we have begun to develop, and to reach out even beyond the borders of our particular discipline and bring other people into this thing. I'm so grateful to all of the effort that all of you put into your presentations today and sharing with us what you're doing and some of your hopes and aspirations. And Caroline, we're all experimenting. We're all trying to figure this out. We all are pretty much at the same place. We'll have some. Obviously, we'll make some access to some of the ideas that we've had today available, and we'll reach out to you who are today. And if we don't know who you are and you want to share with us your email address, we can keep you apprised of what's going on. Lots of things are happening with Sunoikisis itself, and so we hope to have some more things about that. Just briefly, we're transitioning to a new internet service provider, to a new hosting service, and rebuilding our digital assets in a way that will hopefully make them more accessible to everyone. We're branching out hopefully into some other areas. So lots of news about what we're doing along those things. So be sure and stay tuned for future things. But again, thank you all to everybody, and we will we'll come back another time.
Thank you, Kenny, for managing the tech.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kenny.